ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनं शलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। ॐ अखण्डमण्डलाकारम् व्याप्तं येन चराचरम् तत्पदं दर्शितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। Shalom friends, today we will be reading out chapter 89 of Upasna Khand Yoga Vasishtha Maharamayan, and in this chapter 89 it is discussed how to acquire powers, how yogis' bodies survive during tapas, and yogis' thoughts actualize. Now Vashiji said, Ram, you must imitate this sage in order to know the nature of the soul and all that is knowable and worth knowing. In order to know these things, you must be without passion and without the emotions of fear and disturbance of your spirits at all times. As this sage seemed to pass the course of many millions of years in cheerful meditation, so you shall have to habituate yourself to silent contemplation without any discontent in your mind. There have been many more sages of great minds in their times and places who have had their perfection in the same way and who are worthy of your imitation to attain your object. Knowing that pain or pleasure never affects the soul and that it is everlasting and everywhere in all places, no one, O mighty Prince, has any cause to worry or has any cause to sorry for it. There are many persons living in this world who are well acquainted with the nature of the soul, but nobody is so sorry for the misery of human souls as you yourself. Remain quiet and in good cheer. With the magnanimity and composure of your mind, know yourself to be imperishable without any change or regeneration. No living liberated man like yourself is ever subject to sorrow or joy at the changing fortunes of life. Just as the brave lion is never moved from his calmness like the changeful peacock. Ram said, Sage, your discourse raises a question in me which I want to disperse like an autumn cloud. Tell me, Sage, who is best acquainted with the spiritual knowledge? Why are the bodies of living liberated persons not seen mounting the skies? To this Vashiji replied, Ram, know the powers of mounting the sky and flying in the air naturally belongs to winged creatures. All the various motions seen to act in different directions are according to the natural tendencies of bodies. They are never desired by the spiritually minded pupil. The ability to fly is not desirable for the living liberated soul. The power to fly is easily acquired by unspiritual and ignorant people. By many physical and artificial powers, derived by application of proper means, mantras, and other practices. The power of flying is no business for the knower of the self, who is only concerned with his knowledge of the self or knowledge of the soul. He is content with his spiritual knowledge and union with the Supreme Soul and doesn't meddle with the practices of the ignorant practitioners of false yoga. No, all earthly contrivances to be the offspring of worldliness and the progeny of a spiritual ignorance. Say then, what wise knower of the self is there whom would be so foolish as to plunge himself in this gross ignorance? He whom pursues the path of spiritual ignorance by his meditation and contrivances for his temporal welfare must be blind to the future welfare of his soul and lives against the course of the holy sage and saint. By the continued practice of yoga or some other arts and expedients of mantras and the like, it is possible for the wise as well as the unwise to acquire the power of flying in the air. But the spiritual man remains quite aloof and afar from these. He has no desire for any such thing. He is content with himself and finds his rest in the Supreme Soul, beside which he has nothing in view. He has neither aerial journey nor any supernatural power or worldly enjoyment for his object. His view is neither earthly glory nor honor, nor does he desire to live or fear to die. He is ever content and quiet in his soul, devoid of desires and affections in his mind. He is of the form of empty air and remains with his spiritual knowledge as the idol of his soul. He is not apprehensive of adversity or calamity. He is unaffected by feelings of pleasure and pain. He is fully satisfied in his privation of everything and is unconcerned about his life and death by remaining like the living dead. He remains unmoved at all events and odds, just as the ocean is at standstill with all the outpourings of the rivers. He continues to meditate on and adore the divine spirit in his own spirit. He has no need of acquiring or amassing any wealth for himself, nor is he in need of asking anything of anybody for his support. The unspiritual man who aims at the acquisition of supernatural powers must sacrifice the means or his perfection in order to acquire such powers. All things are accomplished by application of their proper means, and what is thus ordained to take place cannot be undone even by the three-eyed god Shiva himself. The power of flying depends on the application of proper means and not on one's act of willing only. Nothing can alter the nature of things, as that of the coolness of moonbeams, whether one is all knowing or much knowing, or all powerful or much powerful, as a Vishnu or Shiva, yet there is nobody who has the power to set aside the destined law of nature. Thus, it depends on the nature of things, Ram, the combination of times and circumstances, and the application at proper means and mantras that cause a mortal to fly in the air and an immortal to descend on earth. Similarly, it is the property of some drugs, gems, and mantras to destroy the destructive power of poison, and of wine to intoxicate the wine drinker, and of vomiting agents to cause vomiting. All things naturally have the power of producing some effect according to its proper application and the mode and manner of it. Hence, no one who is acquainted with these things is able to fly in the air, and who is filled with spiritual knowledge has no need of such practices. All knowledge relating to the properties of things and their application in proper mode and manner to bring about certain ends is of no good to the knower of the self for his attainment of spiritual wisdom. He who wishes to have supernatural powers may aim them by long practice, but what need has a yogi of these practices or powers for himself? After his freedom from the net of his desires, the yogi attains his spiritual state. Then how can he entertain any desire which is opposed to it? Everyone endeavors to remain in the course to which he is led by the desires rising in the heart, in his heart. Whether he is learned or not, in due time he reaps the reward of his endeavors. Vitavya never endeavored to acquire any supernatural power. All his endeavors were directed towards gaining spiritual perfection, which he obtained by his tapas in the forest. Should one persist practicing and applying the proper means, it is not impossible or hard to acquire supernatural powers. One's success attaining perfection in any object depends entirely on his personal efforts and may be called the fruit of the tree of his own labor. But these successes and perfections are of no use to those great minded men who have known the knowable one in himself and who have made an end of their worldly desires. Ram said, Sage, I have yet another question for your explanation, and it is this. Why didn't the hungry beasts of the desert devour the dead like body of the devoted sage? And why didn't spoil under the earth that covered it? How was it that the bodiless and liberated soul of the sage, which was absorbed in the sunlight, returned to resume its dilapidated body buried in the mountain cave? Vasishtha replied, the conscious soul that believes itself to be embodied with its mortal body and bound by the ropes of its desires and the bonds of its affections is subject to both the feeling of pleasure and the pangs of pain. But the intelligent soul, which relies on its pure consciousness, is freed from the net of its desires, remains only with its subtle spiritual body. Here now, Ram, the reason why the body of the yogi is not subject to the accidents or disjunction or corruption of many hundreds of years. Whenever the mind is occupied with the thought of anything, it is immediately assimilated into the nature of that object and assumes the same form on itself. Thus, Upon seeing or thinking of an enemy, the mind turns to hatred at the very sight or thought of its foe. The mind assumes the nature of friendliness upon the visit and memory of a friend. So, on seeing a hill or tree or passenger that bears no hatred or friendship to it, the mind remains equally indifferent, without any change in its disposition as it is perceived by us. Again, the mind is sweetened, tasting sweets, and embittered by tasting the bitter. It becomes fond of the sweet and adverse to whatever is sour and bitter and unpalatable. So, when a hungry beast comes in the sight of a calm yogi, its envious nature is changed to dispassion and it desists from doing him any injury. The malicious being, freed from his malice in the company of an even minded sage, desists from the doing any harm to anyone. Just as the indifferent traveler has no business breaking straggling branches and trees growing on the wayside, which the rude rustics are likely to chop off and cut down. But the savage beast, removed from the side of the yogi, resumes its hungry nature again in the company of devouring and wild beasts of the forest. Hence, it was that the envious beast of the forest, the tigers, lions, and bears, and also the reptiles and creeping insects of earth, didn't molest the calm body of the sage so long as they lugged and cracked about it. The reason why the body was not reduced to the dust of the earth is because the silent conscience that dwells in common in all bodies of animals, vegetables, minerals, and abides in them as in the person of a dumb creature, wouldn't allow them to injure the innocent body of the sage lying flat on the ground. I will repeat this sentence again. The reason why the body was not reduced to the dust of earth is because the silent conscience that dwells in common in all bodies of animals, vegetables, and minerals, and abides in them as in the person of a dumb creature, won't allow them to injure the innocent body of the sage lying flat on the ground. The spiritualized body of yogis seen to move about on earth like the shadow of something floating on the water. Therefore, the spiritual body of the sage, which was rarefied above the elemental bodies by virtue of his spiritual knowledge, became quite incorruptible in its nature. Hear me tell you another reason, Ram. It is the lack of vibration which causes destruction, as it is vibration or breathing of the heart that is the cause of life. The breathing of vital breeze causes the vibration of the arteries, and this being stopped, the body becomes as still as a stone. He who has lost the pulsations of his heart and vital breeze, when the internal and external pulsations of the body are at a stop, know, O well-informed Ram, the intestinal parts are not liable to any change. The motion of the body being stopped and the action of the heart having ceased, the humors of the body become as stiff and inert as the solid mountain of Meru. So the lack of fluctuation causes the steadiness of all things in the world. Hence, the bodies of sage are known to be as quiet as the blocks wood or stone. Therefore, the bodies of yogis remain entire for thousands of years, like clouds in the sky and stones underneath the water. They are neither soiled nor rotten at any time. It was in this manner that this sage who knew the truth and was best acquainted with the knowledge of the knowable left his earthly body in order to find the rest of his soul in the spiritual spirit, in the supreme spirit. Those men of great minds who are dispassionate and know what is chiefly to be known above all others, pass beyond the bounds of this earth and even of their bodies to assume an independent form of their own. They are perfect masters of themselves, whose minds are well governed by their right understanding. They are not affected by the influence of their destiny or the acts of their past lives, nor moved by their desires of any kind. The minds of complete yogis are of the nature of destiny because they can easily effect whatever they think upon, as if they were the acts of chance, as in Kakatliya Sanyog. So it was the sage Vitavya who no sooner thought of the renovation of his body that he found it presented before his sight as if it were an act of chance. When the soul forsakes its earthly frame after the fruition of the fruits of its past actions is over, it assumes a spiritual form, which is the state of its disembodied liberation. And when it enjoys its perfect liberty in its independent state, the mind, free from its desires, is released from all its bonds and assumes the spiritual form of the pure soul. Then it effects instantly all that it wishes to do and becomes all powerful as the great Lord of all. This was all in chapter 90, 89, and now we will take the chapter 90, two forms of mind extinction, with and without form. Vashiji said, after sage Vitavya has subdued his heart and mind by his self inquiry and reasoning, there arose in him the qualities of universal benevolence and generosity. Ram asked, how do you say, sage, that the quality of benevolence sprang in the mind of the sage after it had been wholly absorbed in itself by its rationality? Tell me, sage, who is the best of speakers? How can the feelings of universal love and friendliness arise in the heart, which is wholly cold and quiet, or in the mind, which is entranced in the divine spirit? Shiji replied, there are two kinds of mental numbness. One is coma in the living body, and other its deadness after the material body is dead and gone. One is where the form of the mind remains, and the other is where even the form ceases to be. Possession of the mind is the cause of grief, and its extinction is the spring of happiness. Therefore, one should practice grinding the essence of his mind in order to arrive to its utter extinction. The mind, beset by the net of the vain desires of the world, is subject to repeated births, which are the sources of endless grief. He is considered a miserable being who thinks much of his person and esteems his body as the product of the good rewards of his past lives, and who accounts his foolish and blinded mind as a great gift to him. How can we expect the decrease of our distress as long as the mind is the mistress of the body? Upon setting down, the mind of the world appears to disappear before us. No, the mind is the root of all the miseries of life, and its desires are the sprouts of the forest of our disasters. Ramji asked, who is it, sage, whose mind is extinct? What is the manner of this extinction? How is its extinction brought on? And what is the nature of its annihilation? Vashiji replied, O support of Raghu's race, I have told you before the nature of the mind. Now you will hear, O best of inquirers, the manner of extinguishing its impulses. When the mind is unmoved and remains steady in pleasure or pain, unshaken like a rock at the gentle breathe of our breathing, then it is paralyzed and dead. Know that the mind is also dull as dead when it is devoid of the sense of its separateness from others, and when it is not degraded from the loftiness of its universality to the meanness of its personality. Know also that the mind is dead and cold when it is not moved by difficulties or dangers, or excited by pride or giddiness, or elated by festivity or depressed by poverty. In short, when it doesn't lose its serene temperament at any reverse of fortune. Know, gentle Ram, that this is what it is meant by the death of the mind and numbness of the heart. This is the inseparable property of living liberation. Know mindfulness to be foolishness, and unmindedness is true wisdom. Upon extinction of mental affections, the pure essence of the mind appears to light. The true intrinsic nature of the mind is revealed after its emotions are extinguished, and this temperament of the mind is what living liberated persons have. The mind is filled with benevolent qualities, has best wishes for all living beings. It is freed from the pains of repeated births in the world of grief. It is called the living liberated mind. The nature of the living liberated mind is said to be its intrinsic essence, which is full with its holy wishes and exempt from the doom of reincarnation. The personal mind has a notion of its personality as distinct from its body. This is the nature of the mind of those who are liberated in their lifetime. When the living liberated person loses the individuality of his mind and becomes as pleasing as moonbeams, by virtue of his universal benevolence, then the mind becomes expanded and extended, present everywhere at all times. The living liberated person, being mindless of himself, becomes as cold hearted as a plant growing in a frigid climate, where it blooms with its mild virtues like blossoms of a winter plant. The impersonal mind that I described earlier is the coolness of the disembodied soul that is altogether liberated from the consciousness of its personality. All the excellent virtues and qualities that reside in the in the embodied soul are utterly lost and drowned in the disembodied soul upon its liberation from the knowledge of its personality. In the case of disembodied liberation, the consciousness of self personality being lost, the mind also loses its formal existence in formlessness, when there remains nothing of it. There remains no more merit or demerit, or any beauty or deformity. It neither shines nor sets anymore, nor is there any consciousness of pain or pleasure in it. It has no sense of light or darkness, or the perception of day or night. It has no knowledge of space and sky, or of the sides, altitudes, or depth of the firmament. Its desires and efforts are lost with its essence, and there remains no trace of its entity or nothingness whatever. It is neither dark nor light, nor transparent as the sky. It doesn't twinkle like a star or shine forth as solar and lunar lights. There is nothing to which it may resemble in its transparency. Those minds that have freed themselves from all worldly cares and are rid of their thoughts are the minds that rove in this state of freedom as the winds wander freely in the region of vacuum. Intelligent souls that are numb and sleepy are set in perfect sleep bliss beyond the trouble of activity, rajas, and lethargy, tamas. They have assumed the forms of empty bodies and find their rest in the supreme joy in which they are dissolved in the unity of the deity. With this, chapter 90 comes to an end, and we rest our today's reading session here after the reading completion of chapter 90, Upasna Khand, Vasishtha Maharamayan. We will again meet with the reading of chapter 91 onwards. Until then, Shivoham, friends.